So this is more on DevOps basics and Azure dashboard, DevOps dashboards and uh, Azure boards. So mix of it. So we are covering bit of Azure DevOps walkthrough video, the DevOps basics which we have covered as such in terms of release, in terms of testing, in terms of everything. But as we keep going, the further topics will be Azure pipelines and test plans and artifacts. Those topics I haven't covered specifically on the part of the DevOps basics and the Azure DevOps walkthrough and the Azure ports, dashboards also. Let's go into this quiz. You are currently developing a project for a client that will be managing work items via Azure DevOps. So you wanted as an organization are developing a project to a client there you wanted to manage the work items via DevOps. You want to make sure that the work item process you choose for the client allows the requirement change requests and reviews to be tracked. So there are when you wanted to set a process for your team for your project client and so these are the things you have to keep in mind. It should allow for requirements, change requests, risks, and review to be tracked. So when I'm doing it in Azure DevOps, okay, which option do I select for the work item process? Let me show that. If you can see under the project settings, if I go under the project settings and under the process settings, if I go under the process, I select all processes. Which process would you select? Because this is what is the situations are. Requirements, change requests, or risks or reviews to be tracked. So in that kind of case, you would prefer a CMMI capability maturity uh, index something, uh, model maturity index something. There, but Agile Scrum doesn't come under this. This basic, yes, we go with the backlogs and all that. But when you select this CMMI, what happens is it comes with the review. You can help in terms of reviewing it. If you wanted any change request, you can go and change it. So that is what they are asking for. Requirements, risks. If I choose a different process, Scrum, ask me for a different one. Okay. Product backlog item and epic bugs and all that. Whereas in Agile, so this process you have to look at it. So while using it, so it's CMMI. Next one is your company has an Azure DevOps environment. You guys, as an organization, you guys are using Azure DevOps that can be accessed only by Active Directory users. Azure Active Directory users, not Active Directory users, Azure Active Directory users. What is difference between Azure AD and AD? That is an on-prem AD. This is an Azure AD. So Azure. So when you are logging in, if I shown you this one, what do you say? In the previous videos, I've shown you how do I log in into dev.azure.com from portal.azure.com and how the users are able to log in into the Azure DevOps. So so the same thing, that's what they're saying, that the company is saying that it is only accessed by Azure Active Directory users. You are instructed to make sure that the Azure DevOps environment can only be accessed from devices connected to company's on-prem network. What is it? What is the ask right now? It is just not ensuring that Azure AD users are the ones who are joining this or logging into Azure DevOps. You also have a requirement saying that they should be only accessed from devices which are connected to your on-prem networks. Like you have to go inside the company and when you have been in the company's network, on-prem network, that is when your devices will, like your laptops or your phones, will allow to log in into the into the Azure DevOps. Otherwise, they won't. So, in such cases, what is the following action you will take? Assign devices to a security group? No, this is coming to Azure AD point of view. Why it's coming under Azure DevOps basics or walkthrough? Because when you wanted to access it, the first thing is you logged in into Azure DevOps. Now, how our users are able to log in and are able to do it? It's because of the Azure Active Directory is the one who is behind the scenes ensuring the authentication and authorization is in place. No, no, it's more about authentication, not authorization point of. It's more about the authentication. So uh, assigning device doesn't help. Create a GPO doesn't help. Create a security project settings. There is so if you go into project security settings, there is policies, the permissions. But it this doesn't help because you are Azure Active Directory is the one who's authenticating it. So if they want to ensure that, they have to write conditional access policies. Conditional access policy says that which devices are allowed to authenticate when they are, so something login request is coming, it will just not look for Azure AD for easy username and credentials are matching. They'll also check for some conditions if conditional access policies are there, like saying that from which location, geographical location, from which IP address. So in that kind of thing, we can select that the IP address should be from the on-prem network. If they are connected to on-prem network, they will have the IP address. The machines will have that on-prem network IP address. Now that is when it can happen. So will this come under Azure DevOps certifications? Yes. Because this is like, so that's why they say that in certification level, they say the prerequisite is to have the AZ-104. Uh, so it's good to carry the that much expertise in terms of understanding how the Azure uh, works and all that. Because when you are using a DevOps tool like Azure DevOps, there's a 90% chance that you are using Azure environment. Get to know about it, so it will really help you. But in case if you're really serious about cracking certification, you have to have the idea on Azure. But being a DevOps engineer, not all rules are saying to you to be Azure centric, or you need to definitely carry Azure experience and all that. Nothing like that. Market is actually hiring there folks who are having understanding on CI/CD pipelines or just Kubernetes or just Terraform and all that. The the answer to that is conditional access policies. Moving to Azure DevOps, Jira must be replaced with build pipelines. Okay, when you are moving to Azure DevOps, Jira must be replaced with build pipelines. So there is a Jira tool that must be replaced to build pipelines because you are moving from some tool, whether you're moving from your scripting way of deployments and all that from Jenkins to Azure DevOps. But in that situation, if Jira must be replaced with build pipelines, okay, select no adjustment required if the underline is accurate. Okay. When you're migrating to Azure DevOps, they're saying that we'll convert Jira, replace Jira with the build pipelines of Azure DevOps. Uh, that's very accurate. The reason is because Jira is a more of a is planning point of view. It helps. It helps in terms of the dashboard tracking and all that, and also in terms of getting tickets and checking your tickets and all that. But here I see that it doesn't replace build pipelines. It can help in terms of repos, release pipelines, boards. It helps in terms of replacement boards because in Jira, when you're tracking the flow of what work items are being assigned, what product backlogs and all that, the same thing you can do it on boards. Currently, defining a release strategy for an app 01. So to have a release strategy, so this comes under DevOps basics. This doesn't relate it to anything related to Azure DevOps here. This is a DevOps basics, but this is a Azure DevOps. similar interview questions can come in place. You are currently defining a release strategy for an app named App 01. The strategy should allow you to keep the time it takes to deploy new releases of the app to a minimum. So they want a deployment strategy, and the one which they're seeking is when you are deploying a new version, the downtime should be to a minimum time. Okay. And you keep the time it takes to deploy. So shift from should be very minimum. It's when you're ensuring that you're shifting from the older version to a newer version, it should be very minimum. Not a downtime here. It is more about shifting one from one older version to a newer version. It should be very fast. In such case, the strategy should also allow you to roll back in the shortest period of time. Okay, so it's just not shifting to a faster space, but also it's to ensure that in case if there is you didn't like the new version or customers didn't like the new version, not you didn't like it, it's customers didn't like it, or some things like you wanted to switch back with some reason is there to the older version. In kind of case, which one would you prefer? So there is a red-black deployment, which is also called blue-green deployment. Blue-green deployment says that red-black deployment or blue-green deployments are same. Blue and a green. One is older version, one is a newer version. This strategy is saying that keeping that one. So instead of keeping the endpoint as the older version, you keep the endpoint with a newer version of it. If you wanted to roll back, you can again switch that one. This is satisfying. Next one is rolling deployment. Rolling deployment is like you have 100 VMs, suppose. You'll first update 10 VMs and they're good, then you go for another 10 VMs, like that. Oh, there is a big bang deployment. I'm not sure this big bang deployment. Okay. Natural process of developing a new feature we'll discuss. Product manager. It's more of not a deployment strategy, is what I can see. Canary deployment is to have the infrastructure 100%. You send 90% traffic to the older version, 10% traffic to the uh, newer version. So here it's not about keeping this one or it's not about doing this. So I don't see uh, exactly in terms of requirements what was just mentioned. I don't see in terms of that Canary is trying to talk about it. Canary is like having both versions, newer version and older version, and routing a traffic simultaneously, like a beta version point of view, a part of traffic into the newer version. So as per this questions, I feel this is a red black deployment is what the green, blue and green deployment. Company has an application that contains a number of Azure services. Okay, so there are number of app services. There are number of Azure functions. You would like to view recommendations with regards to security of web apps and functions. Okay, so from what you have for Azure services and functions, you would like to review the recommendations with regards to security. So if at all reviewing these recommendations, I could have seen Azure Advisor, but recommendations regards to security, it comes under Defender for Cloud, which is Security Center previously. Right now, it is just refreshed to Defender for Cloud. So all the recommendations related to security, you can find it on the this one. Azure Advisor will also give some suggestions about some unutilized ones and all that. So that's more of a administrator level recommendations and costing point of view, bit of some things. So I'm not selecting any of the log analytics and event hubs. You need to consider the underlying segment to establish whether it is accurate. Okay, just give me a minute. Company has a multi-tier architecture application. So, okay, a multi-tier architecture. that has a front end hosted in Azure App Service. So there is like what is the multi-tier like front end, back end, and data tier. One front end, which is the one which designs the pages, the cosmetic one, is hosted on Azure App Service. Pinpoint the average load times of application pages. You should make use of Azure Event Hubs. Pinpoint the average load times of the application pages. Okay. So for app service or for resources, when you wanted to go and check the metrics of it, this is more of the metrics in terms of how the application is actually functioning and all that. Now, either you use Azure monitoring applications or you use Azure Apps Insights or you container insights based on the service. The monitoring solutions will change, but event hubs are not the right ones to actually monitor metrics. It is more about tracking the events and pushing it to the other locations wherever it is needed. So I won't keep event hubs as the right one there. I'll just leave that here and I'll say application insights is the one because we are talking about Azure App Service. And then you need to recommend a project metrics for dashboards in Azure DevOps. Which chart widgets should you recommend for each metrics? If you see here, there's a chart widget, which widgets if you go into Azure DevOps, and if I look at dashboards, if I select a widget, I can say which widget I would like to choose. For widget may be used once the for the elapsed time from creation of work. Okay, the time elapsed from the time of creation of work items to their completion. So either the cycle time here or the lead time here. Velocity won't help me in terms of that. Uh, but cycle time is more of the active from the time it is active. If you can go and search for this lead time and everything, you can get it. Okay, or cycle time. So you can just add it and you can get the burn down chart and everything. So once you have a project and all the task items, everything, you will it will populate the data after some couple of hours. But the point is, I feel it's lead time because here there was nothing related to saying to find the time of creation of work items. Okay. Okay. So if you remember, as I was talking about when I'm trying to create work items, any task here, I'm actually working on making it active or not. Okay. Uh, so in that kind of case, then this is comes as lead time. You need to recommend the same thing because I remember that I long time this points which we have this is the same one. What widgets would you choose if at all time elapsed from the work item once they are active? It's not from the time of creation, but once from the time from they are created, not from the time they are been active. What is the time of completion and all that? So that point of time, this is what do you say? It's cycle time. We prefer cycle time. Cycle because what cycle they are going through life cycle point of view, but not in exactly in life cycle because creation is trying to talk about lead time. But I kept it in my mind in that way from the time it is active cycle because your managers or your stakeholders, someone will ask me that could you help me with some uh, a dashboard which will help me keep a track of items which are currently act from the time they are been active, what has their how what is their progress in terms of completing and all that, how much time did it take in the past 8 weeks or 8 months or 6 months, that how much time is roughly being taken for the items to be completed and all that. How many items are being completed comes under the velocity, to understand the velocity of the team. Next, the burn down chart. The burn down chart will give me the remaining work. So, this is also a widget. So I seen a lot many times burn down chart and lead time used a lot, uh, and also the velocity of the team. Your company uses ServiceNow for incident management. Okay, there is a for reporting. So how do you get incidents from ServiceNow? That's what the company is using. You develop an application that runs on Azure. Okay, you have an application that's running on Azure, and your company needs to generate a ticket in ServiceNow, and an application fails to authenticate. You need to generate, your company should be in a position to generate tickets whenever some application is failing to authenticate. So someone has to go and create a ticket. Someone has to uh, go, either it's an automated way of doing it or a manual way of doing it. But there should be, whenever there's an application is failing, there should be a ticket in the service now. Okay, so what is a solution which you would go? Application Insights will help me in terms of app service, but they didn't mention that they're running on app service here. So I'll not go for that one. Automation and control, they haven't said that we need an automated generation of tickets, so I'll not go with this. ITSM, yeah, uh, they are actually generalizing in terms of generating tickets and all that incidents. Insight and analytics, so this is not the actually solution, insights and analytics. I will prefer an ITSM point of view so that I can have tickets in place whenever something is happening. That's the whole point. If you see uh, the the point of the question is trying to ask and all that. The answer is also, I believe, ITSM. Company is building a new web application. You plan to collect feedback from pilot users on features. Okay. So you are building a web application. You plan to collect a feedback from pilot users on the features being delivered. All the pilot users have corporate computer that is using Google Chrome and feedback extension installed, and pilot users will test the application by using Chrome. You need to identify which access levels are required to ensure the developers can request and gather feedback from pilot users. Okay. The solution must use the principle of least privilege, which access level. So there are two users here. One is developers, one is pilot users. So pilot users are someone having the corporate computer, and more of they are going and giving the feedback, again doing the test and all that. So in such case, uh, there is pilot user and there is developers who are gathering the feedback and everything from the pilot users. What is the access level you will provide to developers? So there is basic, there is stakeholder, there's basic plus test plans, there's Visual Studio subscriber. So Visual Studio subscriber, some role is there. So either we give Visual Studio, or we give basic, or we give basic plus test plans. Now we don't give stakeholders because stakeholder doesn't have access to certain things what uh, the basic users can have. So I'll give for basic because there's no privileged here, so I'll leave the privileged. Same question is for pilot users. Pilot users, uh, we don't want to give them basic because it will give them access to repositories and things which I don't want. They can have access to dashboards, they can have access to test plans, all that. So I prefer giving a stakeholder missions for that people whoever I'm actually bringing into pilot point of view and all that. We can also bring, if they're trying to talk about permissions level, would you give contributor access or reader access something, then I would have gone for reader access and all that, but they're not trying to talk about that. They're trying to talk about when users are being onboarded, what type of access would you wanted to give there? Type of access level. Yeah. So I would give for pilot users, stakeholders. Have a private GitHub repository, you need to display commit status message on Azure boards. What should you do? So you have a GitHub repository, private GitHub repository, that too. Okay, you need to display the commit status of the repository. The GitHub should be there in the Azure boards. What should you do first? Configure a multi-factor authentication on your GitHub account. That doesn't really matter here. Incorrect. Azure DevOps pipelines have nothing to do with getting the commit status to the Azure boards. Next one is you add the Azure boards app to the repository, create a GitHub action at GitHub. This is the one. You integrate Azure boards. So if you go and see how to integrate Azure boards with GitHub, you will get the way to integrate and everything. So that is one thing. You have multiple teams that have worked on projects in Azure DevOps. You need to plan and manage the consumer users for each product. The solution must provide an overview of all projects. So there are different projects in your organization, and all projects you wanted to actually plan, manage consumers for each project and all that, consumers and producers. In that kind of case, so there is predecessor and successor linked to the feature, the user story of each project. No, the right one. So you're going inside the Azure boards and you're talking about specific things, which doesn't help. Add a parent and child link, but other projects, of all projects in an overview. No, install dependency tracker extension. Not even sure. View dependencies, you must then use a project, both projects, dependency tracker, enables across teams projects. It is flexible to show all dependencies a team is consuming. Yeah, I think that is why, like they said, that consumers and producers, which is nothing but we're trying to talk about teams. They just have rephrased the way they're trying to put it. But the way they wanted to have how do you want it to manage and plan accordingly? So it shows all the dependencies. We can go ahead and install. How do you go and install? You need to, how do you install an extension? You go into organization settings and here you'll see extension. Go and install an extension. So how do you go and browse from the marketplace and you can install. So here I will select dependency tracker. There it is. And as it is Microsoft one, that's why they tried. That is for free anyways. Consume it and all that. I believe that is the one we're trying to talk morely. So again, they are specific to project point of view in boards they're trying to talk, which doesn't help. You're talking about all projects, management, everything. For planning projects for 3 customers. So 3 customers are, I have that pic. Let me open that pic. Have project plans. One company wants to track all the product backlog items, bugs. One is trying to talk about product backlogs, bugs on each Kanban board, and PBI. Take PBI into task on the okay. So you have to keep going to product backlogs. So first thing is if I go into product backlogs, so the company wants product backlogs, bugs, Kanban board. Kanban board is part of the Scrum planning itself, but they wanted to report Kanban board is the way to actually track the requests and everything. So break the PBI, which is nothing but the backlog items, into tasks and on the task board. Okay, so you wanted to break into subtasks. At that point of time, you go for what's the question? Plan all the customers' work items management. Which item process should you use for each customer? Okay. Again, they're trying to say based on that, you go into project settings. What process will you choose? Will you choose basic, agile, Scrum, CMMI? For this kind of things, which is Eliteware, we go for Scrum way of doing it. This is because Scrum is more granular approach if you're going for more granular approach. And track user stories works on Kanban board and track bugs and tasks on task board. That kind of thing you go for Scrum. Sorry, Agile. Track request change. I think this is again back to the first question which we have went in. The first question is trying to talk about change request risk and reviews and all that. So if you select it, so Scrum will give you more a bottom will more deeper approach to break down your product backlog items, and Agile doesn't give that one product backlog items. Uh, Here in CMMI you have the review, change requests, and all that. So back to the question, Litware is suggested Scrum, Contoso, the second company, it is suggested Agile. Same thing for a datum, which is this a datum corp, which is this CMMI. So that is it. This is the answers, guys. I believe I have explained everything to my understanding. Please go and refer this video once again and get to know, go and research. If you're having questions on what terminologies and everything, please go to Google or get it 5 minutes quick introduction videos from YouTube. There are a lot many. Get to know about it. It's fine. Okay, this is more about how a certification way looks at it. So this, even if you're scoring well, doesn't mean that you are actually doing very well in terms of Azure DevOps. But yes, in terms of holistic view of understanding your how the tool's working and all that, yes, as a manager level or your management level or architect level, it is great to have this certification knowledge and all that. But as someone who wants to be executioners in Azure DevOps and all that, this one, it's very important that you need to know about it, but it's more about other activities involved in the upcoming things. So it's good to have this one, but don't get it's okay being that's all in boards and dashboards. Seen not many people have extensively worked on, many companies have tried doing it, but there are a lot of companies equally are utilizing dashboards and boards, Azure boards to do some great tracking activity and planning activity and monitoring activity of their DevOps work items or their planning phase. Yeah, you guys.